So good afternoon, everybody that's popping in here one by one. It's good to see or good to have you here this evening. We appreciate your time. My name is David Fisher, president of the Sacramento City Teachers Association and second grade teacher for over 20 years. This evening, we are pleased to present our forum on creating meaningful student assessments in Sacramento City Unified School District. And we have 5 compelling expert panelists here to speak this evening. What I'd like to do is read each of their bios in order of appearance, and then they will each speak. There is a Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen, I believe, and so if you have questions, you can type it into that. We'll do our best. As you know, it's sometimes challenging. We'll do our best to answer questions. If there's time at the end, we'll also answer questions live. So I'd like to get started by reading the bios of our distinguished panelists in order of their appearance. First, we are honored to have Princess Moss, who's an elementary school music teacher from Louisa County, Virginia. She's also vice president of the National Education Association, the nation's largest professional organization with more than 3 million members. She's the daughter of 2 school bus drivers. The vice president has a distinguished career in education. An important part of her work, both as an officer in NEA and before, has been a staunch advocate and ally of students, educators, and families who have been marginalized, including BIPOC communities and students with disabilities. After we hear from Princess, we will hear from David Goldberg. He's been an educator for more than 20 years, with most of his career as a bilingual teacher at Murchison Elementary School in Los Angeles. He is fluent in both Spanish and sign language. His wife is also an educator in Los Angeles, and David is currently the vice president of the California Teachers Association with more than 300,000 members. After that, we'll be hearing from Ingrid Hutchins, our very own school teacher here in Sacramento. Ingrid's a second grade teacher, and for more than 20 years, she has taught every elementary grade level from kindergarten through 6th grade. And she has earned her degree in child development from California State University, Sacramento, and she brings the unique perspective of on-the-ground school teacher with these experiences. After Ingrid, we're happy to hear from Kevin G. Wellner, the professor at the University of Colorado Boulder School of Education, specializing in educational policy and law. He is director of the National Education Policy Center, NEPC. Dr. Wellner's present research examines the use and misuse of research in policymaking and explores various issues concerning the intersection between educational rights litigation, educational opportunity scholarship. Dr. Wellner teaches courses in educational policy, program evaluation, school law, social foundations of education, and his publications include Closing the Opportunity Gap, What America Must Do to Give Every Child an Even Chance. And then finally, we'll hear from Lori Shepard, PhD. She's a University Distinguished Professor at the University of Colorado Boulder in the Research and Evaluation Methodology Program. Her research focuses on psychometrics and the use and misuse of tests in educational settings. Her technical work has contributed to validity theory, standard setting, and statistical models for detecting test bias. Her research studies on test use have addressed the identification of learning disabilities, readiness screening for kindergarten, grade retention, teacher testing, effects of high-stakes accountability testing, and most recently, the use of classroom assessments to support teaching and learning. Dr. Shepard is past president of the American Educational Research Association and past president of the National Council on Measurement in Education. She was elected to the National Academy of Education in 1992 and served as president of the NAED from 2005 to 2009. Dr. Shepard has also served as editor of the Journal of Educational Measurement and of the American Educational Research Journal. Without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Vice President Princess Moss for her perspective from the national level.
Oh, wow. Thank you. Thank you, President Fisher, for, first of all, inviting me to be here. I am really honored to have the opportunity to address the critical topic of assessments. and I always look forward to being with the members of SCTA. There are some affiliates that feel like family to me, and SCTA is definitely one of them. Bef- um, Before I get to the crux of my remarks, I just want to acknowledge, first of all, how challenging it has been to be an educator during these last 13 months. I believe you will each agree when I say that this has been the most difficult time many of us can remember. But SCTA and educators all across the nation have done what educators have been forced to do since long before we even heard the word COVID. You have truly held our public education system together. I am grateful for all you have done this past year. And on behalf of the National Education Association, I want to thank you for all that I know that you have done and that I know you will continue to do in the future. Like nothing else in our lifetimes, the pandemic brought out in the open for the entire world to see inequities that educators have seen in public school classrooms for a long, long time. The pandemic worsened the inequities that have been woven into the fabric of this nation from the very beginning. Long before COVID, students were trapped in the digital homework app. Students were living in food deserts before COVID without access to nutritional meals, aside from the ones they received at school. And before COVID, students had no place. Some students had no place to call home. And we know who experiences these inequities the most. They're the students who were already marginalized. I'm talking about our Black, Brown, and Indigenous students and our learning is cluttered by the obstacles of systemic racism, classism, and inadequate funding of their schools. We know something else. These national racial divisions are not by accident. None of this is by accident. They exist by design. And that is why the work you are doing in Sacramento, SCTA, is so very important. No matter how tired you become, no matter how long the battle takes, the members of SCTA always stand up for students. The barriers to success you dismantle help more of our students succeed. You know, I said a few minutes ago that I really consider you to be family. The seeds of that feeling were planted during the 2016-17 school year. I was NEA Secretary Treasurer at the time, and I had the opportunity to speak at the bargaining table on behalf of SCTA educators and the students they teach. The students you teach. It took a year of fighting, but you didn't give up. You kept fighting. You won a contract that put students first. In 2019, when the superintendent failed to honor the contract he signed, I was with you during your one-day strike. And together, we told the district that a deal is a deal. When I look back on these two experiences, the experience of being at the bargaining table with you and the experience of walking the picket line with you later, as you demanded what you knew your students need, I am always reminded of the power and the opportunity that flows to the students when educators and parents join together and demand student success. SCTA, you used your power. You stood up. You called on elected leaders. You told them to keep their promises. We knew the SCTA, SCUSD testing MOU that was signed as part of negotiations was critical. We knew that it would ensure educators have real input in the creation and use of district-wide student assessments. This agreement must be enforced, especially now as our nation begins to turn the corner away from the pandemic. And I thank you. I thank you for standing up to ensure that that agreement is enforced. And I want you to know that you do not stand alone. You stand with the support of the 3 million member National Education Association, the largest labor union in our entire nation. As a collective voice of education, educators and public education from California to Connecticut, from Florida to Washington State, and all sorts of states, districts, and communities in between, NEA believes what SCTA believes. If they must be used, then student assessments must also be meaningful, and they must also be useful. They must enhance learning and not take valuable student and educator time away from learning. That is why NEA has created a task force that will work on the federal level to alleviate the burden of standardized tests on our students and educators. To get that done, we plan to call on the federal government to incentivize the creation of authentic assessment systems. We must activate the knowledge and skills of students in a way that generates meaningful data for students, educators, and families. The overarching goal of this task force, which is in the process of being created by President Becky Pringle, is to ensure equity and opportunity for every student. So we will gather input from those standing on the front lines, those who know the topic best. We all know that that's educators. Arming ourselves with that information will position the NEA to play a leading role with the Department of Education and other education stakeholders. Together, we will reimagine the future of assessments. We will redefine their purpose and identify the types and use of authentic assessments that will help us reach that overarching goal. We plan to produce a draft framework and get input on it from delegates coming to the upcoming representative assembly. It'll be our virtual representative assembly, but we are planning for that because we know that those who are in the trenches know best about what our students need and will give the feedback we need in order to move forward with the Department of Education. Then after that, we will review and make recommendations on any of the new business items that come to the Representative Assembly, which is one of the largest decision-making, which is the largest decision-making body of the National Education Association. This work is proceeding quickly because this work is vital. Our students are depending on us to get it right. You know, I am honored to be here today with others who know the topic of assessments very well. I'm honored to be among you, and I want to thank the other panelists, and I want to thank each and every one of you for making time to be here today. I thank you for the insights I know you will provide on this important topic. And now I will turn the program, I believe, do I return this over to CTA Vice President David Goldberg.
Thank you, Vice President Moss. Thank you, Brother Fisher. Thank you for having me. Thank you all, SCTA folks being out there. I will First of all, just want to be here to honor you all. That's really my role today. I really am clear that in a lot of ways, I'm just the wind beneath your wings. And I really want to honor you all for deciding to really take on this issue. Focusing on this issue is about our profession. You know, we remain still one of the only professions that doesn't control our own assessments, our own professional development, right? It's systemic. That's because of who we are and who we serve, right? Historically, teaching has been women's work, been devalued. The students, as Vice President Moss was talking about, our students are devalued as well. And so while you focusing on this issue is about really putting that at the forefront, it's also taking our work as union members and focusing at putting at the center of that work our students, which is really what drives our work in a powerful, powerful way. And not just our students, but our communities. I had the privilege of working with SCTA now on an NEA program about community schools, where we are really re-envisioning what it means to be a community school, where it's not just, for example, a passive thing where a district comes and puts a health clinic on our campus, which is a beautiful and important thing. But this is about what we teach. It's about how we teach. It's who makes the decisions. It's how we assess. It's how we as educators are in connected with our students and our communities in those vitally important issues. And so this is part of that. This information that you all are going to get. First of all, I'm so excited to have Ms. Hutchins up next, who's in a lot of ways a practitioner on the ground, really taking the lead on this. That is what this is about. This is about creating capacity at each one of our school sites, because it's one thing to have a great plan, but it's another thing to really have that plan resonate at our work sites, resonate with our workers, give our workers, our co-workers, our colleagues, our union family, brothers and sisters, the ability to really articulate what it means to have assessments that meet our goals, meet our needs as educators and the needs of our students. And so this is not just an opportunity to come to a webinar, a great one, but it's also a way to start thinking about the struggles ahead, because there will be struggles around assessment. It gets to such of the core issues as I laid out about respect for ourselves, our profession, our students, and our community. So I really want to honor you for taking this lead. I really want to say that we are here to support you. I am personally here to support you, and CTA organizationally, along with Ms. Moss and the whole NEA family, are all here to support you. And with that, let me, without further ado, go to Ms. Hutchins, who is really, again, the one, and you all collectively and her individually are who we're here really to support. So thank you for the work you are doing in advance of what you're about to say. Thank you.
Thanks, Ingrid. Before you start, just want to remind, first of all, thank you, Vice President Moss and Goldberg. That was beautiful. Before I hand it over to my friend and colleague, Ms. Hutchins, just let people know you may have noticed it is recording, and we do have all the panelists permission for that, but it's only the panelists that are in the recording. I probably should have mentioned at the beginning, but just wanted to take care of that business now. And now on to you, Ms. Hutchins.
Thank you so much. I'm speaking tonight to give a classroom perspective. I've been a teacher in Sac City for over 20 years, and I've taught elementary grades, transitional kindergarten, all the way through 6th grade, and yes, each and every grade in between. And so I've seen how assessments affect all the elementary grades. However, I feel I still can give a voice to what we may have as concerns in the other segments as well. Our district has a couple of assessment issues. One of them is the schedule. And so if you don't mind, I'm going to grab my reading glasses, because to read our testing schedule, the font is so tiny. It's very difficult to see, but I'm going to give you the 2nd grade schedule for this year had we, followed that schedule. So we started school on September 3rd. Our first testing window opened September 10th. And we were to give the core phonics survey, which I'll speak about in a little bit, and the oral reading record. We also were supposed to do a math comprehensive test and an ELA interim from the previous grade. Then on October, I just want to point out that is within days of our children coming in, and we're supposed to be building relationships. And instead of building relationships, we're starting testing, most of which in 2nd grade is individualized. So the students who have not learned procedures yet are working independently somehow in the classroom while you're doing all that testing. Then October 12th, another window opens for another math test. This is interim 1. And then we're lucky and we get a nice break until January 5th. And I guess that's so we can write report cards and do our parent-teacher conferences. Then January 5th, a window opens for the phonics survey again, the oral reading record again, then half of the high frequency words, and ELA interim 2. We're also during that window supposed to do a math interim 2. Then in April, the window opens again for EL interim 3. And then from May to the end of school, we're to do the core phonics survey again, the oral reading record again, the rest of the high frequency words, and ELA interim 4. So that's most of the school year. Most of the school year we are supposed to be assessing. That's leaving very little time for actual instruction. So some of those tests I mentioned don't give us very great data. So the core test, and that's a kindergarten through 3rd grade test. The children read words, and it's supposed to give us data letting us know which sounds they need help with. However, they give us some, for every line, we also get a line of make-believe words. So when you have a high-functioning reader who's reading for comprehension, they start to falter on that test. And even though they can read fluently and they can understand well all the way through, I've had students that are a level R reader when we're only supposed to be up to a level M, and they fail that test because those make-believe words throw them off. And even when you preload them and say it's a make-believe word, children get very nervous and they're trying to do their best and they're trying to build this meaning out of what they're saying, and they start to fluster and they fail that test. With our interim tests, they give us maybe 1 or 2 questions for each standard. And so when you give 1 or 2 questions for each standard, it's easy to fail a standard. It's easy to make a mistake. Maybe you don't understand how a question's answered. And so the data looks like a child can't do something, whereas they probably can, but on that date with that question, they weren't able to show it. They try to test way too many standards all at the same time on those interim tests. So the data, once we get it, then we have to do this academic conferencing, which again takes us out of the classroom. So we've lost classroom time for testing. Now we're losing classroom time to discuss the data that we can't use. The teachers like to use the data that we get ongoing. I walk through the room, we're working on math problems. I can look over a shoulder and see that a child doesn't know how to regroup. I don't need to give an interim test to see that a child doesn't know how to regroup. The feedback that my parents are looking for is that feedback. They want to know how their child's doing day to day. The information I give about how they're doing as we're learning a new concept is far more helpful for them than it is for me to give them some sort of raw score from our interim test. So that brings me to wonder, what exactly is our data used for? It's not used for me. It does not drive my instruction. I know the district would like to say it does, but it doesn't. I'm telling you, when I go to lesson plan, I don't look back at that data because I know that it's weak data. And so I'm looking at, again, my ongoing authentic assessment as I'm walking through a room, I'm speaking to a child, or I'm giving a weekly low stress assessment of how they're doing. It's not helping our parents. So this data is just for data's sake. It's also used in a weaponized way. And what I mean by that is it's put onto a website, and parents that belong to a cohort that like to attack teachers go on there, and they come to the board meeting. And I happened to listen to a board meeting one time as a parent told the board how terribly upset they were that the 2nd grade teachers are not teaching children how to read because the core data said that they were failing. And she went on to talk about her feelings about this, and then ended her speech to say her child never took a core test, was in 7th grade, it didn't affect him at all, but she's still very upset about it. And so we're just giving parents scores without context, and they are getting upset, and they are coming to the board and saying, why aren't you doing something about these teachers? So my feeling is a lot of this data is used for that purpose. We need to have a reason to say, it's not class size that we need to reduce, it's we need to test more. We need to keep this data going so you can see how poorly the classroom is moving along. Chasing data is hurting our most vulnerable students. It's stealing their instructional time. It's causing anxiety. I've watched children cry. It's testing the wrong things. If we're giving a test on a computer, and I understand that the high stakes state tests are on computers. However, when you're testing a child on a computer, there is also a level of testing that we don't see in the scores, and that's whether or not they have computer literacy. A child who's not computer literate is going to fail that score, even though they may know all those standards. It creates a culture of testing. We're teaching to the test, we're taking away the joys of school because those are the easiest things to get rid of. Art gets cut first, playtime gets cut first, and while people may think that playtime's not necessary, that is exactly how children learn. They learn by playing, they learn by being hands-on. We lose all that hands-on time so that we can teach them how to answer a question and not be tricked by it. It's causing school to become just joyless for a lot of our kids, and especially, like I said, our most vulnerable kids. They're starting to feel like they're coming to school to be chastised. You know, they see a score, and even if their teacher says very nicely to them what their score is, they know what that score means, and they feel like they're failing and that there's no point. Why am I coming to school? I can't pass these tests. There's a much better way for us to improve our student outcomes. Smaller class sizes is top of the list. If we have less students to work with, we can give each child the individualized instruction that they require. Consistent teacher-driven professional development. We're given professional development that quite honestly does not help us in the classroom most of the time. We need a intervention framework that makes sense. They say these leads to interventions, but we're not provided any interventions. It's all just said, but there's no follow through. We need social and emotional support structures, not activities. They'll give us plenty of activities, but we need the support. We need people in the schools that are supporting children. We need social workers. We need psychologists, we need counselors, we need people there to actually support the children. Again, not just talking about it, but doing it. And we need authentic assessments that are worthwhile, significant, and meaningful. I just wanted to end this with a quote that I read quite a few weeks ago that just really resonated with me from, and I hope I'm saying her name correctly, Behan Farhadi. But she said, the revolution we need in education will not be standardized, monetized, operationalized, or centralized. Students are not data points. Learning is not consumption, and teachers are not machines. And I wanted to say that just because I feel like that right there is what the testing culture does. It does turn children into data points. It does make it seem like learning is consumption, and it does make us become machines. We're losing the art in teaching. Thank you.
Thank you, Ingrid, for that extremely compelling and powerful presentation of what it's like from the classroom level. Next, we're going to hear from Dr. Kevin Willner. I'll just go ahead and turn it over to Dr. Willner.
Thanks, David. Thanks, Princess, David, and Ingrid. I want to pick up on a couple things that Ingrid just spoke about. Probably the most important is saying there was no follow through regarding the interventions that should have followed from the assessment. When we think about the purpose of schooling, it's to provide children with opportunities to learn, right? The richer those opportunities to learn, the more children are going to learn. Same thing with adults, right? And when we deprive children of opportunities to learn, we can expect that the outcomes that are measured are not going to be as strong. And so we speak about achievement gaps. We speak about, quote, failing schools and all of that. Really what we're talking about are opportunity gaps, right? We need to close opportunity gaps. We need to increase opportunities to learn. And the rest of all this measurement needs to be part of that system if the measurement is going to be worthwhile. So if we start from this idea of closing opportunities to learn, opportunity gaps and increasing opportunities to learn, then those must be the end goal of the entire enterprise, right? What follows from that basic truth is a sort of a simple question that we could ask with regard to assessments, and really with regard to any set of school practices. How does this increase opportunities to learn? With regard to assessments, how is this particular assessment being used to increase opportunities to learn? And it's not enough to say, as so many districts now say, well, it's informing our data-driven decision-making, right? Our data-driven decision-making. And that data-driven decision-making is only valuable if there's that follow-through that Ingrid was talking about, right? If the resources and interventions in those decisions, those data-driven decisions, are improving opportunities to learn, and if the data themselves are appropriate and complete for making those decisions, right? A data-driven decision-making system relying on poor data is also going to drive poor decision-making. So are the tests useful? And what I'm hearing is that a lot of them are not. Are they being followed through on? What I'm hearing is that a lot of them are not. And for me, it's very helpful to think of each assessment as part of a healthy evaluative feedback loop, right? So this, again, this idea of a system. So what is being evaluated with that assessment, right? Why is it in play? What's being evaluated? What decisions are being informed? Are those decisions then increasing resources, increasing supports for students and their educators, right? To close opportunity gaps? Are they increasing the opportunities to learn? So that's sort of my main thing that I want to just keep returning to, and I hope that we all keep in mind. The core test example that Ingrid offered it's heartbreaking, right? It's not just that this isn't a great data point, or that even if it were, right, failing a test as a data point, it also means something to the child, even if it doesn't mean anything to the teacher, right? It means something to the child. It has an impact. And let me just, one other thing, and then I really want to turn this over to Lori. Right now, we're in this weird moment ending, hopefully, this pandemic, but also with the American Rescue Plan money coming in to LEAs all over the country. My understanding is that the Sacramento School District is going to receive over $300 million additional dollars through the ARP, the American Rescue Plan. And this gives the district a golden opportunity to improve students' opportunities to learn, right? To do something as part of this decision-making process. Assessments can be part of that, right? They can be an important and effective part of that system. Or they could be superfluous, right? There can be just too many of them. As Ingrid just explained, they can be harmful. They also can have, again, as was explained, a very high opportunity cost, taking time away and other resources away from student learning. And to offer an obvious example of this, many places are considering using the new ARP money for summer school or for extending the school year. And for me, that raises the question, why pay for extra learning time when at the same time we're taking all this time away from learning to test, right? So keeping in mind that core goal, that end goal of increasing the students' opportunities to learn should drive very different decisions with regard to assessment and other policies than simply saying, well, we want more data for our data-driven decision-making, right? We have to move beyond that immediate question to ask the end goal question. So let me turn this over to Lori.
Thank you. Thank you to my fellow panelists. We had one chance to meet beforehand, and I thanked everyone, but I'll do so publicly. I always learn new things, and I was just in awe when Ingrid talked about some of the details she shared again tonight, and these are very powerful. So if I speak from what I know from research on assessment, in some ways, it's just to tell you that you're not imagining this. This is really true. It's replicated over and over and over again. And I think it's continually disheartening to me that there's so much evidence of the negative effects that we have to keep answering to people that say that they're doing this in the name of equity. And that is infuriating. It's not true. So we have to think through what the arguments are and what the evidence is to further emphasize the points, actually, Ingrid, that you've already made. So here's some things to think about. What I notice is that districts and advocates for testing are often not clear about the purpose for testing. And it's a very different way that you would undertake to support learning in the classroom. That kind of assessment is very different from what kind of information is needed less frequently for districts that want to do program evaluation. And to Kevin's earlier point, you have to have a time interval consistent with what you say you're going to use the data for if you're going to intervene to make programs better. First of all, you don't do scattershot testing of everything if you're going to work at making district programs better. You target at an aggregate level, let's say writing, let's say ELA in general, or math practices like argumentation is a current value that maybe we're not doing as well as the new standards say that we should. Let's focus on that. That would be an example at the district level of saying we want to do something, we want to support our teachers at getting better at certain things. What data do we need to be able to do that? That's very different from the kind of assessment that teachers need in classrooms to move learning forward. So you've heard, everyone knows the research on formative assessment, it supports learning. Well, not always. The research on feedback, in fact, says that sometimes feedback can have a negative effect on learning, and there's a pattern. Feedback has a negative effect on learning when you are compared normatively to others in your classroom, and it has a positive effect on learning when you're told substantively how to improve. And by the way, this can be done with curricular tasks, embedded assessments that do not require quantification and sending away to the district office. The products that are misleading people, you mentioned interim assessments, were developed commercially in response to No Child Left Behind. And the idea was to test early and test often to get ready for the end of year No Child Left Behind tests. Those products have certain features. Number one, they have to be curricularly non-specific or you couldn't sell them to vast markets. They have to be computer delivered and therefore all multiple choice. They are poor representations of the thinking and actual content that we want our kids to have access to, yet they're repeatedly administered to keep trying to quantify. Did you know that the subtests on those things are not reliably distinguishable from each other, nor is growth over short periods of time reliably indicated. So here we are focusing on quantifications with those commercial products, and we're not getting the kind of insight that you need to notice. Ingrid, you said regrouping. I can watch that with specific tasks. That's what I want to see. And we want to have a conversational mode so that kids get better at talking about their own learning. So they learn words like regrouping, and they're able to show you an example. That's what I mean by substantive indicators of what kids are getting, what they're not getting, what they next need to learn. That's very different from the quantifications that many of these instruments offer. Of course, I'm a quantitative specialist, so of course we need quantifications when we aggregate. When I want to say something on average is happening across schools or across time as I'm trying to make improvements. I can't talk as much substantively by specific examples at the district level. That's why I have to get clear about my purpose, and then I have to respect what deep learning looks like in classroom. The opportunity costs that have been mentioned mean that I should only do the testing for district purposes more infrequently compared to what I do in the classroom. And for the classroom, I don't need official instruments. Many times I can, with grade level teammates, for example, choose tasks that I think are specifically representative from my curricular materials. I don't necessarily need outside instruments. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Shepard. Also very compelling. I feel like that each one of our panelists could have their own presentation. And so appreciate it very much. Before I move on, to any of the panelists or want to jump in and have a comment and question? If not, I know that there were a couple questions in the Q&A. I think a couple of them were answered privately. So just to go forward with our next steps is we are happy to announce that because of our MOU, we are meeting with our district and our dozens, if not hundreds of bargaining team members that are the experts on the ground on Monday and again Wednesday to talk about an alternative to the state mandated SBAC. Here in California, as you may know, there's an opportunity for a waiver. So we think that that is a positive development that came from the enforceability of our MOU, and we're hoping that by early next week, we will be able to announce, hopefully, an alternative that will be much less intrusive and more useful. And so that's what's happening and next steps here. As far as this presentation or this forum, it's been recorded, and so we'll have it available. I understand there's like something else going on tonight, maybe the President of the United States speaking. So, but you know, he's recorded too, so you can watch him later. I just want to conclude by thanking all the panelists again. I so much appreciate everything that you all have contributed to this and other events we've had here in Sac City. We look forward to working with Dr. Will and Dr. Shepard going forward as we attempt to develop a more constructive and more useful assessment program here in Sacramento City Unified School District. With that said, I think we'll, is there any, okay, there are a couple questions, and I don't know, there's a question of Dr. Shepard, examples of assessments that we appropriate at the district level. Is that something that you would be able to talk about?
Yes, I would not say a commercial product. I would suggest that curriculum should drive what you decide to do. So if you have a particular new effort at science assessments, for example, science learning to be more in keeping with the next generation science standards, those are intended to be phenomena driven. Kids work on specific topics of interest and pursue questions that they want to about scientific phenomena. It's much better when that's local. Earthquakes come to mind in California. That's where I grew up, so I'm not making fun, but that would be an example of something that's being studied that teachers have come together and decided about. And then after you know you've studied certain things, you can have some extension tasks that you decide to administer across the board and score at the district level. It's writing assessments are the best example of what can be collected and scored across the district. Once per year, perhaps at most once per semester. I've worked with teams of teachers who've done mathematics assessments to get at some of the modeling mathematics practices, for example. It really ought to be grounded in your curricular emphases and what you're working on in teacher professional development. So those are all coherently linked. And the things you ask the students to do have to be like what you're teaching them, but a further extension so that it's kind of a good check on this is really what they're coming away with as a new set of skills and knowledge.
There's also a question about what would SCTA plan rather than what the district has proposed. I think, David, you spoke to that a bit.
Sorry, Nikki, can you repeat the question?
The question is, what would SCTA plan rather than what the district has proposed? And we plan to gather teachers together to meet with the district next week to talk specifically about what teachers would find to be useful assessments to at least at first next week is the discussion of what would replace the SBAC for this year.
Right. Well, thanks, Nikki. And, as already has been discussed by panelists and, by Ingrid, is that teachers already do lots of assessments, like on a daily basis or minute by minute, really. So what we want to do is use assessments that teachers are already doing and ones that they find the most meaningful. If we can come together and find some that are in common so that the district can have some of the data that they are seeking, and keeping in mind that the main purpose of assessing students is for their learning. It's not to just collect more data. I think we can all the teachers who have been around for a while can remember maybe their office buildings being, even their office lounges having data walls with brightly colored data of all this mostly meaningful stuff that would pigeonhole students. And I just like to say that what I have found is that you talked a little bit earlier, Dr. Shepard, about people using equity, as a word to try to get more testing, but standardized and off-the-shelf tests and much of the tests that are called benchmarks or interim assessments, they just further exasperate in from what I've seen that sort of labeling of students at such an early grade, and so I think that is something that as educators we want to be very mindful of. But as to what
there are a couple of questions here about the assessments aligning with the standards, aligning with the curriculum. Well, let me jump in briefly on that. So yes, it does. Certainly post 1990 sort of thinking, thinking over the last several decades in the US, has been largely about this importance of having standards that are then aligned to curriculum that are then aligned to assessment. And there is a logic to that, and it does sound like part of what's part of the concerns that I've heard raised is that there isn't the amount of alignment there should be, particularly at the assessment level. But keep in mind that that's not a complete feedback loop, right? That's not, there's nothing in those three things that addresses opportunities to learn, that addresses the resources and the supports, right, that kids and their teachers need. And so if we talk about that alignment, the question then is, okay, what do you do with the results of the assessment, right? It's still, it's not a loop, it's a line, right? It's a line between from standards to curriculum to assessment, and then what, right? So if we're going to make meaning out of that idea, we need to think about the and then what part of it. And there needs to be, again, the ability to do something, both in terms of thinking about, will this assessment realistically be useful for that purpose? And then are we actually using it for that purpose?
Thank you, Dr. Milner. Okay.
David, do you mind if I speak just for a second? I'm looking at some of these questions and I see there are some concerns that parents, I assume this is a parent, that they have about this being about bargaining and not about the instructional practice. So since that's my area, do you mind if I talk about it super quick?
Go ahead, of course not.
Just to alleviate those concerns, again, this comes from that perspective for our other panelists who aren't sure where that's coming from. I think this comes from our perspective in our district where there's a lot of anti-union talk all the time. And so when anything comes up, it comes up as a us versus the union kind of lens. And so I just want to discuss what assessments are supposed to do. The point of an assessment is so that a teacher knows how their student is doing and can move their student forward. And what we're getting in terms of our assessment schedule or the assessments themselves don't do that. And so what we're doing is we are testing the children to purely test them, to give data to the district only. That's not what the child's instructional time should be for. The child's instructional time should be for learning. And so we are taking away from that learning time. And I went through in my presentation those dates. If you were to take out a calendar and map it out the way teachers do, it's a significant amount of our classroom time for testing, not for teaching, not for learning, not for any of the things that build knowledge. It's just for data. So it's not a bargaining point and where we should keep ourselves out of it. This is very much our job. Our job does pertain to teaching the children, and we need to speak up about it because they're losing time. Every single child in our district loses time with this schedule, pure and simple. And what we're trying to do is to get something better for them. This doesn't change my world at all, it helps them. And so I really want to make sure that we're framing it that way. I'm concerned that this is an ongoing issue. We're trying to make things better for them.
Thank you, Ingrid. Very well said. I think
David,
with
may I add one other thing to that as well?
Absolutely. Go ahead.
Just because I hear Ingrid not messing around about it and really wanted to put this out there. And I think that's important because I think in essence, what you all are doing is really redefining what it means to be a union, right? For so long, I say this with a historical analysis. My grandmother went on strike for nearly 3.5 weeks in 1971, and then was told that deal in LA was thrown out because it was illegal for teachers to bargain, right? So all the bargaining rights we have, people have struggled to win. But the bargaining rights, we've been put in a box where we can just bargain salary and healthcare, right? And then inevitably, when we bargain over that stuff, people see these greedy teachers, all they care about is salary and healthcare. And in essence, what you all are doing is you're saying that Our collective energy, our collective power as a union and as workers and people who commit themselves to our students it's much too powerful to not engage with these issues. We dedicate our lives day in, day out. We have to engage with these issues in order for our students to get this quality education that they deserve. Means all of us as unions and as workers pushing the boundaries about stuff that's considered not part of bargaining. That is there is a power imbalance, and our students get the crumbs constantly in society, and we as workers constantly get the crumbs. And this is about a broader struggle. And it's also sometimes about saying with our coworkers, as we did in LA. In LA, we went on strike for 6 days in the pouring rain, and we had already resolved our issues around salary and healthcare. But we said we are willing to strike around these broader issues because that is what it's going to take for our students to get what they deserve. And so I just want to echo what Ingrid's saying and what David, you all are doing by having this and saying this is about our work. We're really redefining what it means to be a public sector union, about people who are servants of the community and stand in solidarity with our students and our community around these important issues. So I really want to honor what you all are doing tonight.
And if I could say amen to that, David, thank you for that. And in doing the work that you're doing, SCTA, you are putting students first. And we at the NEA, we applaud you for that because that's what education is about. It should be about the students. So thank you.
Well, thank you both and everybody. I think that might be a good spot to sort of draw to a close. I will say that my children are public school children, and I want their teachers to have a say. And I think we all want our child's teacher to have a say. That's why we all want, for example, our doctors to have a say about how they're going to operate. And we want our teachers to have a say. So that is what it's all about. And we appreciate everyone's time here this afternoon, this evening. And like I said earlier, there's a lot of work to do, but we're very excited. And this should be a great opportunity from this point on to launch us into hopefully a different relationship with assessments and with our district, and moving forward, coming up with some really good and useful plans for assessing our students with the input from the teachers on the ground, like Ms. Hutchins and other. With that, I want to say thank you to everybody and have a great evening, and be safe and good luck next couple days with your students for our teachers, and we'll appreciate everybody's time and see you next time.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Hey, Ingrid, thank you. That was so awesome.